You walked into the room and something shifted. The conversation that was happening actually stopped. People suddenly got busy with their phones, or a colleague who used to give you eye contact avoids yours. Someone who always had something to say barely gave you a word, and you're thinking, did I do something? Here's what I need you to hear. It's probably not what you did, it's what you represent. And that's a very different problem with a very different solution. Listen, if you're just joining this video or on this channel for the first time, my name is Rudy Swigert, and we're going deep into each and every chapter of Stewarding the Tension. In this chapter, we're talking about why people are acting strange around you. So stay with me. In the last chapter, we talked about what's happening inside of you, learning to identify root emotions, increasing self awareness. That's our EQ and IQ. Understanding how internal tension affects your performance. That's good work. You've done it. I'm glad you're here. But there's more layers to this because while you're managing what's going on inside of you, the people around you are managing what's going on inside of them. And a big part of what's destabilizing them is you, not because you're a problem, but because whenever there's a shift in identity, role, or authority, or trajectory in you, the relational system around you starts to destabilize, often before you even do. So in this chapter, we're going to cover 5 things: why energy shifts in rooms, why trust feels fragile, why communication becomes indirect, why support feels inconsistent, and why loyalty gets tested. And by the end of this video, of course, you're going to have a tool. You're going to have something we call the relationship disruption decoder. What is it that's actually going on? And we're going to get to the bottom of it. The tool will help you navigate every single one of those items. Let's get into it. I want to start with the military because it's where I saw this play out the most clear, almost in a surgical way. In the Navy, advancement happens fast. I've seen sailors go from E1, that's a new recruit fresh off the bus, directly to E5, which is mid level management, in 4 years. They move very quickly. And what that means practically is that one day you're part of a peer group. You're eating together, you're complaining about the same things, you're competing for the same limited advancement spots. And then one day, one of you gets promoted, and the dynamic completely changes. I lived this. When I made E5, I had to hand out work assignments to guys who the week before were my peers. Some of them respected it, some of them were clearly resentful. That resentment showed up in tone, in effort, and how conversations ended. I hadn't changed, but the room had. And then it happened again when I made chief at E7 in the Navy. Making chief is one of the biggest career milestones there is. But with every advancement, there are those who advance and those who don't. Former peers split. Some are genuinely proud of you, others are quietly pulling away. Now, here's why I'm telling you this. In the military, this is visible. The stripes are on the uniform, the collar devices are outwards for other people to see. The shift is announced and celebrated. The hierarchy is clear. But in the marketplace, it's subtle. The announcement happens in an email or a meeting. The title changes on an organization chart. And then the soft shift begins. Tone becomes guarded in meetings. Longtime allies grow cautious. People who used to be warm become distant. The communication becomes more procedural and less personal. That's not random. That's a system reacting, and we need to understand that. Here's a reframe that I want you to sit with. Organizations aren't just business operating systems, they are emotional systems. And emotional systems seek stability. When leading shifts, whether someone exits, gets promoted, steps back, or even signals that something is changing, the emotional system of that organization has been disrupted, and it begins searching for equilibrium. I spent 12 years with a major aerospace corporation, and I watched this happen on repeat. Programs would end, new contracts would start, VPs would be laid off, business units would merge, and every time there was a period, I call it the wilderness, where people didn't know where they stood. Some would jockey for position while others would go quiet. And after months of navigating the uncertainty, the dust would settle, teams would find their footing, and performance would normalize. What I want you to understand is that the wilderness isn't a sign that something is wrong. It is the predictable, patterned response of an emotional system trying to recalibrate. And here's the kicker: the root emotion underneath is not what most leaders think. We tend to assume that it's about the change itself. Somebody's leaving, somebody's being replaced, there's a restructure, and we think people are sad or frustrated or even excited. But the primary root emotion, when systems destabilize, is fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of what the change means for them personally, financially, positionally, relationally, fear for their position, fear of maybe understanding or losing their value, fear of their security that's now in question. And fear, when it's unprocessed, watch this, it drives people towards self preservation. You probably know this already. And self preservation makes people act strange. Now, I want to get to the part that most leadership books won't talk about, because what I've just described, systems reacting, people going into survival mode, is organizational and emotional and relational. But there's a layer underneath that is deeply, deeply personal. And so here's the statement that I want you to lock in. If your identity has fused with your role, then any shift in how others respond to you or your role feels like a shift in your worth and in your value. If you've built your sense of self around your title, your authority, your centrality, if the position has become the mirror through which you seek your own value, then the moment the room starts recalibrating, you don't experience that as an organizational process, you experience it as a personal attack. And so the internal question that surface under these circumstances are painful, and they're often unspoken. Who am I if I'm not central? Am I becoming irrelevant? Maybe the organization doesn't need me anymore. Why does the room feel different? I'm the same person. Did I lose something? Am I being put out to pasture? These aren't small questions. These are identity level tremors. And what happens when those tremors aren't named or processed is that the leader becomes hyper vigilant. They start scanning every interaction for signals, tone, eye contact, who gets copied on what email, who's in what meeting. They over assert, they aggressively clarify decisions in an attempt to regain control. They get defensive, and their emotional leakage becomes visible: irritability, impatience, frustration. That seems out of proportion to what's actually happening. The external world is recalibrating, but the internal world is scrambling for footing, scrambling for stability. And those two processes are colliding in real time. Here's what I want you to hear: leaders don't overreact because they're fragile. They overreact because recalibration touches identity. There's a difference, but the solution is the same: differentiation. And I'll get there. All right, let's get to the tool, because I don't want to just describe the problem for you. I want to give you something that you can use today, that you can take away from this video and this chapter with. The relationship disruption decoder is a diagnostic framework. It slows down your interpretation of other people's behavior long enough for wisdom to surface instead of reaction. And here's how it works: when someone's behavior shifts, when someone who was an ally becomes guarded, or when communication becomes indirect, when a colleague who was warm is suddenly distant, before you react, you run it through 5 diagnostic lenses. And here they are. The first lens is your fear response. Remember, we're getting all the way to the root of this thing: is what's really going on? What am I afraid of? And I want you to ask yourself, is the person responding to perceived instability? Are they going into self preservation mode, which they very well may be? Signs of this are subtle, things like increased caution, reduced vulnerability, more procedural communication, a quiet withdrawal. And here's the thing about fear: it rarely announces itself loudly, it's often quiet, rote, and procedural. When you recognize it for what it is, fear, it changes everything about how you respond. The second lens in the tool is status protection. Is this person protecting their position? Are they scared? Is there fear? Are they suddenly more visible than they've historically been? How are they reacting or responding to organizational change? Are they showing up in rooms that they haven't prioritized in the past? Are they forming strategic alliances, doing things that maybe seem out of character? This is visibility seeking behavior. And again, it's not betrayal to you, it's survival wiring activating under pressure. Their true need isn't dominance, it's directional security. The third layer is scanning for opportunities. When programs would come to an end, or when there was an announcement that there may have been maybe a change forthcoming, when funding was running out, particularly in aerospace corporations, is we start dusting off the resume and scanning for opportunity, keeping one in our back pocket just in case things do come to an end. When comfort is disrupted, people become activated. They start making moves that they hadn't been making, looking internally or externally for what's next. That's not necessarily disloyalty to their current role. It is a self preservation mode that they're operating in. That's someone navigating their own wilderness. Give them the grace you'd want them to have when you were navigating yours. The fourth lens is the grief or attachment disruption. Sometimes the behavior shifts to sadness, it shifts to grief. They may be mourning or grieving what was a wonderful time in their professional experience, and it's coming to an end. People lose something real in transitions: a working relationship, a team dynamic that they truly enjoyed, a version of the organization that they loved. Honoring that is part of leading with emotional intelligence. And then the fifth lens is the mirror effect. This one's the hardest, and it requires honest work. You ask, is their shift in response to a signal that I am sending? It brings this back to, is the reactionary response of those on your team responding to a signal that maybe you were the impetus for? Are people mirroring your ambiguity? Are they responding to your inconsistency? Are they adjusting to your emotional leakage as a leader? Before you assign intent to someone else, make sure you have access to your own signals first, because relational systems amplify when leaders leak. The decoder tool doesn't eliminate disruption, it actually clarifies it. And with clarity, we can walk differentiated. I want to spend a minute on accountability real quick before we close out this portion for this chapter, because some of what people are reacting to around you is not the organizational change, it's you. Let me ask you directly, what signals are you emitting right now? Are you emotionally inconsistent? Are you controlling and assertive one day and absent the other day? Are you nervously over explaining in an attempt to reassure people? Or are you retreating to your office and going quiet when the pressure rises? Are you visibly anxious in ways that are bleeding into team culture? Because here's the principle: relational systems amplify when leaders leak. If you spike, the room spikes. If you're the one spreading the anxiety that you're trying to manage, you become the accelerant, not the destabilizer. The discipline here is not suppression. I'm not going to ask you to stuff your emotions or pretend everything is fine. I'm going to ask you to be intentional about where and how you process information. Process privately, process with people you trust, however you do it. Give your emotions space without discharging them onto the room. That's the difference. So, how do you actually lead through this? Here's the four anchors. The first one is clarity. We're going to start putting language. We're going to start pointing our finger, putting them under our thumb and identify exactly what it is that's going on. Communicate specifically what's changing. That's the clarity. Is it an organizational change or something else? And then communicate what's not changing, what's staying the same. The unchanging is often where people find their footing. They're happy and comforted in stabilization. So the things that aren't changing are a good stepping off ground or starting ground for us to walk on. It's when clarity is absent, is when people fill in the blanks with their own fear, with their own stories. Don't let assumptions create narratives that aren't true. Give people the information that they need to stand on firm ground. We want consistency. If you've been present and accessible, keep being present and accessible. If you've been predictable, keep being predictable. Be there until you're not. Consistency builds psychological safety for yourself and for your team. And psychological safety is the bonding agent that holds teams together through transition. And then we're going to take a look at being direct. Don't let tension simmer. Let's speak directly to it. Let's address it early, honestly, and directly. Make sure we're not bullying, but make sure we're level setting expectations and managing them appropriately. Directness will squash rumors, it'll reduce paranoia, and it will disrupt the political drift that takes root when things are left unspoken. And then lastly, there's containment. We're going to lead publicly and process privately. We're not going to allow our internal chaos to become the room's chaos. This isn't suppression, this is stewardship. When you can absorb uncertainty without transmitting anxiety, you become the safest person in the room, and people will borrow calm from your clarity. That's the leader you're becoming. And don't get me wrong, don't take it in a manner where you think I'm saying just don't process the information and be stoic and calm throughout all chaotic circumstances. That's not what's being iterated here. What's being iterated here is an increase in emotional intelligence where you have self-awareness and regulation. So when you're able to be aware of your emotions and your internal anxieties and you start to speak to them with clarity, you can begin to regulate them and assign them into areas that they need to be assigned. If you are if you are leading publicly from a consistent position, then you're able to go back and process quietly with a trusted friend, with a spouse, with a therapist or a counselor, or whoever it is that you discharge these things with. The key is that you keep showing up day after day and you can be depended on in that manner. Here's where I want to land. The recalibration happening around you is not a referendum of your net worth. The room feeling different is not evidence that you are less. The shifting loyalty and the guarded conversations are not proof that you're failing. They're the predictable patterned response of an emotional system navigating change. And you don't have to now defend that, but you are now equipped to interpret that and not just react to it. And so the question that I want to leave you with is this, and the workbook at the end of this chapter in the physical copy is this. If you navigate this recalibration with steadiness, what will people inherit from watching you do it? Because that's your legacy, not the title, not the position, the way you move through the pressure. And so if this resonated with you, I want you to share this video with another leader navigating a season of transition. I want you to subscribe to the channel, maybe leave a comment, tell me which of the 5 decoder lenses hit closest for you. And if you want to go deeper, grab the full book, Stewarding the Tension. It'll be available at the end of this year. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.